Sunday, so I'm announcing it now that the men's group will be November 5th, Monday, November 5th, which is a week from tomorrow. 7th, that's what I said. I keep saying the 5th. I don't know why. I'm stuck on the 5th. I don't know. Anyway, November 7th, 7th. That's, no, yeah, well, that is true, but 35 years sober. Okay, anyway. Anyway, November 7th, Monday. Thank you.
Good job, Dave.
Thank you.
Hi, Joey Cole. I've already been introduced. I was one of the baristas today, but we need more baristas and whatever the male equivalent of that is. We really need people to step up and come in and volunteer to make coffee in the morning. You want coffee there when you get there, so you can do it for somebody else. That's one thing. The other thing is that we are still collecting for Knight's Pantry. So please, every week, and we really do need food. I notice there's a lot of clothing coming in, and that's nice, but we really do need the food items. They're listed on the front of the box. Please, sometime today, if you can, check out what's necessary, and if you could bring it in. And just a little bit of a heads up, we're going to be collecting toys for the Hope Community Center for the Christmas project. So just so you know that that's coming up, and I'll let you know more about that as we go on. Thank you.
Hi, this is not a committee announcement. It's an open invitation for Larry's 60th birthday. It is going to be here December 10th, so mark it on your calendars.
Good morning, Michelle Flores. Jules is a little preoccupied at the moment, so I'm up here to announce for women's group. We will be having that on Friday, November 4th, 6:30 to 8:30. Feel free, it's going to be potluck style. Feel free to come out and join us.
Hi, Chloe Hatfield. Just letting you know that today's service is going to be about death. I gave 2 warnings beforehand, so just wanted to let you know that that's what this is going to be about.
Thank you very much for all those committee moments. There's a lot going on here in case you didn't know that, so please join us many times to find out what's going on. My opening words today are from the Reverend Christian Schmidt. No matter who or what you are welcome here. Let's be clear. Here we welcome goblins and ghouls, saints and sinners, angels and devils, zombies and werewolves, vampires and witches. We welcome princesses and princes, paupers and farmhands, aliens and astronauts, robots and cyborgs, firefighters and police officers, nurses and doctors, cowboys, cowgirls, cowfolk of all varieties. We welcome Superman, Wonder Woman, Black Panther, Batman, Spider-Man, Black Widow, and Thor. Indeed, we welcome both superheroes and superstars. In short, we welcome people, monsters, and of all manner of creatures. Here we welcome you and all who you are and what you are. Welcome, and let us begin. Our opening music today will be Let All Mortal Flesh Keep Silence, and I think Janet is going to lead us in that.
This is an unusual hymn. It's not in our hymnal, and it needs a little introduction. It's based on a text which was the oldest part of the oldest liturgy still in use in the Christian church, mainly Eastern Orthodox. The original text was called a cherubic hymn, and it was part of the St. James liturgy. So the St. James liturgy dates back to the 5th century AD, and the cherubic hymn dates back farther still to around 275 AD. This is before the Christian church became the official church of the Roman Empire and was still a diverse outsider faith. So this hymn expresses the belief that during their rites, Christ and the whole host of heaven was there with them, saving them from death and eternal damnation. Oh, yeah. And verses 1, 3, and 4. 1, 3, and 4. Let all mortal flesh keep silence, and with fear and trembling stand. Ponder nothing earthly minded, for with blessings in his hand, grace our God to earth descendeth, of all homage to demand. Third verse. Rank on rank the host of heaven spreads his vanguard on the way. As thy light of light descendeth from the realms of endless day, that the powers of hell may vanish as the darkness clears away. At his feet the six-winged seraph, cherubim with sleepless eye, veil their faces to the presence, as with ceaseless voice they cry, Alleluia, 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 Lord Most High.
Our chalice lighted today is Livy. Livy uses the pronouns she, her, and she's 9 years old. And she went to a golf cart Halloween parade at her friend's neighborhood yesterday. Apparently that must have been pretty fun for her to mention it. So, Livy, where are you? So we'll recite these words together. In the light of truth and the warmth of love, we gather to seek, to sustain, and to share. And each week we like to reaffirm our commitment to this organization and to this congregation with our affirmation. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its gift. This is our great covenant to dwell together in peace, to seek truth and love, and to help one another. I wanted to welcome everybody here today. For those of you who are visiting for the first time or have visited several times, please join us. We are an eclectic congregation. We're a lot of fun, as you can see. We do have a called minister who's here in the pulpit a few times a month, but we also have speakers from various religious organizations, various political organizations, nonprofits, our universities. So please join us multiple times to see a little bit about who we are. We have our potluck every once in a while, like next week. So we welcome you to stay after the congregation. Today we'll have a little bit of coffee, but then we'll be doing trunk or treat. So we're a fun group. Please take a moment to just say hi to the person next to you or somebody that you don't know. This is the time in our service where we share our joys and concerns. This is an opportunity for people to share the great things that are going on in their lives and share that with the rest of us. But also, if you have a sorrow or something that's going on that you would like to have us hold in our hearts, please feel free to come to the microphone over here. And if you need me to bring the microphone to your seat, I will happily do that.
I love you all.
So I'm really excited about the trunk or treat after service today. It's going to be a lot of fun. So if you have your trunk, which some of you do, if you have your costumes, bring them out. If you're actually handing out, if you have your trunk open, you're handing out treats, try to park up close. If you're not staying, try to go ahead and leave. But we invite everyone to stay, of course, and mingle even if you don't have a costume. Thank you.
I'm not sure if this is a joy or a concern, but I'll go ahead and do this. And my husband has gone on the first of his retreats for this year, and he'll be gone for a week. So, joy, concern, well, a little bit of both, I guess. And the main thing is he'll be back, and it's very different around the house without him. Very different.
Hello, I'm Livia Wheeler. So today is the fall festival. That's why I look like a witch. And if anyone has salt, please do not come near me. So today is the fall festival where everyone gets out their trunk and then opens their trunk, and then this is the day where the kids' parents just give them a lot of candy, and the kids get sugar rushed everywhere. And yeah, thank you. Last time I went to my cousin's house and they did a parade. When they did the parade, they threw out candy. Yeah. Yesterday I went to Monster Jam and tomorrow's Halloween.
Hi, my name's Andrew. My wife and I and our little one have been coming kind of sporadically recently as we moved here, but big joy for us recently is our little 3-year-old. She's type 1 diabetic, and she got approved for the insulin pump finally after about a year, so it's been huge for us. Gone down from 7 shots in her arm a day down to just controlling it on the phone. So, awesome.
Good morning. Kelly Buchanan. I have a joy in that Miak and I spent a vacation 10 days up in the mountains of North Carolina, the Hot Springs, North Carolina, where we actually assisted a friend of mine, not really run his camp, but we participated in helping a variety of campers coming in from all over the world at midnight, helping them get their camp set up. And then we went on to Black Mountain, North Carolina, where we hiked Chimney Rock and just spent a wonderful time in the fall weather. So it was just a nice, refreshing getaway. Yeah.
Hi, Chloe Hatfield. I have a joy and a concern. My joy is that my grandmother had my Mima had a hip surgery, and she is doing well from that. She's recovering well. The concern, though, is that the medicine that she was taking messed with her blood pressure, and so she fainted, so she has to go to a rehabilitation place for a week. So I'm concerned about that because, to my knowledge, she had the surgery and then went to my parents' house and got a call. It's like, oh, yeah, she's in the hospital. I'm like, oh, okay, that's not how that was supposed to go. So I'm happy that she is recovering well. I'm sad that her blood pressure was messed with. Yeah.
Hi guys, I'm Jules. I get to wear PJs to work tomorrow for a PJ party for my kids, and I'm so excited. I am so excited to roll out of bed and then go to work and not have to worry about what I'm wearing.
I think generally the joy of going to a work that you like is very big. Let's just take a minute. We didn't have a lot of sorrows, but we have a few concerns, so let's hold those in our hearts and just take a minute of silence. Amen. I don't see any online joys or concerns. Martha, did you see any? No. Okay. All right. All right. Next we have our Time for All Ages, and we have Paula Despang to lead us in that. Paula, take it away. You may.
I'm going to share with you a story from The Storyteller's Goddess. It's written by Carolyn McIver Edwards. She's a writer and a storyteller and a 4th grade teacher. She's busy. This story comes from the Hindu tradition. There's not enough room, the people were crying. There's not enough room. Well, it was true. Plants were so thick on the forest floor that the strongest knives could not cut paths through them. Corn and rice grew so high in the fields they towered like trees over the people. People had not enough to eat in those times because no one died. Babies came and grew bigger and bigger, but people that did not get old and they never left the earth. That was when the goddess Kali turned over in her sleep. The people's cry, "There's not enough room," became part of her dream. But she must have been ready to wake because the next cry, "There's not enough room," woke her and she sat up. "You disturb my sleep," she bellowed, rubbing her eyes with her fists. "But there's not enough room," the people called. Kali drew on her robes. She walked to her window, threw it open to look out on the world. She put her dark hands on the sill and leaned out. Her black hair ruffled in the wind. What she saw made her draw back into her own room. She saw crowds of people piled on each other, none of them old, all of them elbowing each other as if to get at vats of food in buildings crammed together so tightly it was hard to see the sky. Animals swarmed through the throngs. The air was hot with sweat and perfumes and oil. Kali, inside, licked her lips. She put her hands on her hips. "Time!" she yelled. Her servant, Time, came running. "Bring me my red sari," she ordered. Time brought the garment, dark as the color of blood. Kali threw off the gray robes of sleep and fastened the red about her. "Clothe yourself," she said to her servant. "We're going out. And bring me my jewels." Time did as he was bid. He took up her gray robes for himself and put on shoes in the shape of fish. Then he brought Kali her necklace, glinting with skulls. "Take these," Kali said, as she thrust gifts wrapped in golden paper into Time's hands. "Now call my chariot." The chariot came, pulled by 8 white stallions and 8 black mares. Fire leaped from its wheels when Kali and Time climbed onto its platform. With a loud cry, Kali raised her hand and let loose the rain. The horses smoked across the distance to earth. Before each village, Kali drew in a rein. Her servant Time stepped from the chariot and handed the gold-wrapped gifts to people who crowded at each stop. In each package, people found Kali's gifts: spider webs, dust, decay, mold, worms, rust, mushrooms, crumbling, rot, mildew, the smell of rich earth, aging. It was on that day that crops knew more than just growing and blooming and flowering, fruiting. They knew also the withering that returned them to the soil. It was on that day that the plants of the forest floor began to add to the blackness of the soil so that trees could grow. Animals had baby, but now the babies grew old. Humans too began to age. They also began to die so that there would be room for their children and their children's children. Kali and her servant Time returned to her palace. Exhausted, she fell, still crimson-clothed, across her bed. Time undressed her gently and tucked her under the covers. Kali is the goddess who dances at funerals and sometimes stops babies from being born. Kali still rides with her servant, Time. Since that first trip, though, Time has carried his own gifts. Time gives people the gift of white hairs and wraps them carefully in the gold paper of wisdom and acceptance.
Thank you, Paula. It's time for our interlude and offering. This is an opportunity for you to contribute to the livelihood of this church. We encourage you to give generously. We like to contribute to a nonprofit. This quarter, we're contributing to the American Civil Liberties Union. So 40% of the plate offering will go to that organization. So please give generously, and we will have our Sunny and is it the band coming up? Just Sunny. All right.
So, quick thing about this piece, it is called Funeral March, trying to keep with the theme that we have coming up a little bit. You're going to hear two main sections of this piece. The beginning of it sounds very angry, kind of has to do with some of the anger, resentment that comes along with death. And the second part sounds a lot more happy, just supposed to be just the memories that we get to have during someone's lifetime.
Thank you very much, Sunny. Martha reminded me just now, I had forgotten about this, that we've decided a long time ago as a congregation that the offering that we take up, the Share the Plate, on the 5th Sunday of the month goes to our Pastoral Care Committee. And this turns out we have 5 Sundays in October. So just to make that little correction, that will go to Pastoral Care, who does amazing work in helping people, drive them to doctor's appointments, and just generally love on them. So thank you very much. Can we just give a round of applause to our Pastoral Care Committee? Okay, we're going to sing our kids out? Okay, ready? I'm going to just give you a note and we're going to go from there. We love you and bless you and send you on your way. We love you and bless you today and every day. That was one of the most orderly removals that I've ever seen. I think the kids were anxious to go because I think there's going to be fun in the back. So our speaker today is Chloe Hatfield. Her topic is living with death. Chloe has been an established member of our congregation since 2015, where the death of a beloved family member started her search into her personal journey for truth and meaning. This is what brought her to this congregation. Since childhood, death has been a prominent subject that has appeared in her life, time and time again, with the fear of the unknown causing extreme distress and a desperate need to search for how to cope with these anxieties. Today, she will be sharing her personal experiences with the complicated and delicate subject of death, how others have handled coping with death, and how she has made peace with the formidable fact of life. Chloe?
Hello, everyone. When I was in my senior year, class of 2014, I was given the prompt, what do you believe happens after you die? In my 7th period English class. I was absolutely thrilled to be able to write my thoughts on such a powerful subject, but when putting more thoughts into my essay, I couldn't answer decisively. I answered with many different beliefs that I had picked up from those around me and from personal experiences, such as ghosts, reincarnation, different forms of netherworlds like heaven or Valhalla, and of course, with being raised in an atheist household, nothing. I had my own personal reservations of what I hoped would be the case, and a ton of fear for what could actually happen. But there was no way I could be definite in my answer and remain honest. To be completely honest, it has been a thought that I have had weighing on my shoulders since I was in single digits. When I was 5 years old, I remember walking into the living room to my parents watching a crime scene investigation show. And as I curiously watched along with them, the screen pictured the remains of a human skull. Now, I can't for sure say of any experiences I had regarding death before this moment, other than my mother recalling that I was at a funeral of a great-grandparent when I was 3. But from what I can remember, it felt like a repressed memory was unlocked, as if I had knew about the concept of death before, and my stomach immediately was tied up in knots. That was my first time I could remember encountering death. When I decided to talk to my parents further about the subject, my mother shared her views and explained to me that when someone dies, she believes there is no afterlife, and you just cease to exist one day. Being so young and being unable to fathom eternity, this freaked me out a little bit. To add on to the anxiety about death that was slowly but surely starting to grow, my father and I were waiting in the car when It's the End of the World as We Know It by REM came on the radio. I inquired what the singer meant by that, and my extremely honest science teacher of a father told me, in about 5 billion years, the sun will turn into a red giant, causing the world to end. But don't worry, the human race will be extinct long before that. That obviously didn't help my 6-year-old brain with its qualms about death.
In 2007, I had my first familial death that I was old enough to remember. My great Aunt Barbara was in hospice due to pancreatic cancer, and I was experiencing grieving and coping mechanisms from the people around me for the first time. I saw how some family members prayed, how some took care of everyone else by cooking, cleaning, running errands, etc. And I remember seeing my father, stoic and logical, when dealing with the details of his aunt's impending condition, and then laughing with long-lost relatives in the hallway as they arrived and reminisced. It was a snowy February when she passed, and I remember being allowed into the enclosed garden to play in the snow. And as a Floridian, I don't get that often. As I played and threw snow into the air, I watched it sparkle in the sun, which was shining in the clearest blue sky. I felt as if all the care in the world just melted away, as if it was the first time I really saw the beauty of the world, and for a moment, nothing mattered. As I stepped inside from that moment, I was informed of my aunt's passing. At the time, I felt regret and sadness that I wasn't inside to be there as she passed. Later, I realized that in its own way, it was a great experience that helped me deal with my first death. As the year continued, I was to face more death in my father's immediate family. 3 weeks after my Aunt Barbara had died, her husband, my Uncle Kenneth, passed away of what my mother explained was a broken heart. My Uncle Travis passed away from an overdose, and my Aunt Millie had sadly committed suicide. I saw 2007 as a cursed year and experienced death in excess for the first time. As I observed my family members during these memorial services and throughout multiple summer and winter visits to Tennessee, I noticed how death was talked about almost nonchalantly. My Nana would talk about how a murder had happened and how, at a location we had passed as we drove the hilly roads of Knoxville to look at Christmas lights. Or how she'd point to a house and notice that she knew the person that resided there while explaining the recent passing of their loved one in the same breath and tone. Whenever we went to visit any relative in Tennessee, death was always an indifferent topic in the conversation, usually had over an array of Southern food. In 2010, I experienced my first direct relative passing, my grandfather, Tom Lomas. His passing wasn't sudden, as he was in hospice in a semi-unconscious state, and we were aware that the end of his life would come sooner rather than later. This was the first time I had seen somebody actively dying up close. My mother had me in the room with her at his bedside, and she said that it would be nice for me to speak to him as he could possibly still hear. I am unable to remember what I said, but as I spoke to him, he raised his hand up as if reaching for something. My mother instructed me to hold his hand, but I felt scared to do so. I did anyways, but the entire time I felt uneasy because even though I cared for my grandfather and was sad that he was starting to pass, this experience was foreign to me, and I didn't know how to feel about holding the hand of someone who was in between life and death. I felt guilty for feeling those feelings, as I wanted to be respectful, but I couldn't help the way I felt. A few days later, my mother and I were meeting with her best friend and her daughter, who were in town from Miami, and as we finished up lunch, my mother was notified of her father's passing. This was the first time I experienced my mother's coping mechanisms towards death, and as the Wonder Woman I had always regarded her as, she took it in stride and continued with her plans for the day, including running a SEMDEN meeting that night. I was taken aback a little to see that how she coped was by remaining strong and carrying on with her day as if nothing had happened. I felt that she should have started to cry at the news that her father just left this plane of existence, because that's what I would have done if I was in her shoes at the time. But knowing my mother, that's the complete opposite of how she operates under grim and stressful circumstances. As I have gotten older, I understand her methods of coping and greatly admire her strength and ability to take charge in handling the hardest parts to deal with for many others. Years later, in 2015, my father's younger sister, my Aunt Tracy, passed away due to cerebral hypoxia. Once again, I was met with the casual coping styles of the South as family members gathered and talked about my aunt's passing as if it was just another family dinner conversation. I could see that my father was solemn, but in a way I felt as if he was annoyed. I understand now that it was just stress because I realized at the time that there's a lot of responsibility and expense that is put onto the people remaining after someone dies. And like how my mother was with her father passing, my father and his stepsister, my Aunt Pat, were the ones that handled the hard part. This sense of duty was exacerbated by the fact that they wanted to help ease the grief of my Nana, the grief my Nana was facing after losing her youngest child. When we came back from the memorial, I witnessed my Nana on her couch, holding my Aunt Tracy's ashes to her chest, rocking back and forth as she cradled it softly and quietly. It completely shattered my heart. Less than 2 years later, in February of 2017, my Nana passed away. This was my second grandparent to pass away, and the first and only time I had ever seen my father cry. I was shaken to my core to experience this moment of raw emotional vulnerability from someone so stone-faced and reserved, but incredibly honored to be able to comfort him at his most despondent time. This funeral was also the first traditional funeral that I can remember attending. Before then, it had been memorials or celebrations of life, but for my Nana's passing, she was to be taken to a cemetery right after and had an open casket viewing. At that point, I had never seen a dead body in person. Once again, I didn't know how to feel, other than the general sadness of my Nana's passing, and I didn't really know what to do while visiting the open casket. Looking at it from a logical standpoint, it seemed weird to me that there was a corpse just out in the open on display for the guests coming into the room to visit and see. That being said, I did understand the reasoning and emotional significance of this practice, and as I stood by my Nana's casket, I honored her memory by reciting the prayer that she had taught me when I was younger. Now I lay me down to sleep, I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. My father and my Aunt Pat once again took over the responsibility of handling the expenses and work of putting together the funeral. My father had put together a beautiful photo collage DVD of my Nana throughout her life, accompanied by some of her favorite music. It was brought to our attention during the receiving of friends that one of the pictures used was the 1960s equivalent of a boudoir photo that was intended for my father's father during his time in the Navy, which my father mistakenly took for a bathing suit picture. The melancholy air was replaced with boisterous laughter for a good moment. Towards the end of the funeral, as we started to make our way to the cemetery, my father remarked how 3 generations of our family had been served by the same funeral home, Rose Mortuary. I don't know why, but my brain processed that statement as if it were a type of legacy, and that in the next generation and the generations to come, we would be there. Although I lived nowhere near Knoxville, Tennessee. Now going back into my timeline, from late middle school to most of high school, I went through a punk goth phase. I was starting to feel the effects of extreme depression, not necessarily correlated with any deaths, but what I can only assume now as side effects of my ADHD/neurodivergency that was unknown to me at the time, as I was not diagnosed until I was an adult. With this phase, I would embrace and find beauty in macabre themes and celebrated the dark and depressing. My room had dark colors, and at one point, I even replaced a burnt-out light bulb with a black light for my cave of darkness to be complete. I had a vanity with goth electric candelabras and a tiny paperweight tombstone, and multiple plushies of Halloween-themed and skeletal animals. During this phase, I still had a fear of death. But I felt that if I could embrace it and somehow show death that I wasn't scared of it, but in turn an admirer, that I could somehow conquer my fear in a fake it till you make it type scenario. It gave me a strange sense of security that I had some kind of control over death, and in a way, I felt almost immortal, as if death couldn't hurt me. Yeah. Believe it or not, a lot of young people don't think about death and their mortality. They take their extremely dangerous and irresponsible actions for granted, as if they can never die while they're young. They'll see news of someone their age dying and perceive it as a 1 in a million type chance, to where they'll say, but that will never happen to me. I was no exception to that. I was not a reckless child, but as I stated before, I felt I had some control over death and felt like I couldn't die, strictly because of my age. As we have all learned about the stages of coping, you can see that I was in the denial stage. Throughout this time, and over the span of many years leading up to today, I would watch crime scene investigation shows with my Mima, and we would bond over the shows as we made prediction on who the killer was and try to solve the case before the show was over. This led to a fascination of forensic investigation and the psyche of a murderer. In April of 2017, I joined a Seminole County Community Law Enforcement Academy, where I was introduced to the inner workings of law enforcement and criminal forensic investigation. This was my first step into the career path of forensic investigation. Spoiler alert, that did not happen. Along with those classes, I took the liberty of following Instagram accounts that focus on forensic investigation, autopsies, and the bodies of the dead after an accident or decomposition. I thought if I were to expose myself to these types of images, that I would get past the grotesque visuals and be more than prepared for a life in the forensic investigation field. That plan backfired horribly, as I, at the time, did not know my own limits, or more so, tried to break past them, not regarding how it could affect my mental health. Later in that year, I would experience what I call the year of death. From September 2017 to September 2018, I had constant dreams of brutal, realistic death. Almost every night I would go to sleep and be plagued with these nightmares that would leave me frozen in fear and drenched in sweat as I awoke. It was multiple scenarios ranging from workplace-related accidents involving audio animatronics and machine malfunctions to scenes straight out of a horror movie with the people I loved playing the role of the victims. It had gotten to a point where I wasn't able to sleep without the lights being on, so that when I awoke, I would at least be pacified in knowing there was nothing lurking in the dark while being unable to move. The problem with that, though, was that after I awoke, the nightmares would be fresh in my mind, and the scenes from that nightmare would replay constantly before my body would eventually relax, and I could conveniently grab my phone to distract me. So then it became a point to where I couldn't fall asleep without the lights and the TV on. From there, I could immediately distract myself and not dwell on the gruesome images I had seen moments before. To this day, I still don't know what caused those dreams, but I had multiple theories. It could have been the stress from my job and the harassment I was experiencing from both coworkers and leaders, or it could have been the stress from moving away from my childhood home into a transitional house with my parents, knowing that when the lease was up in a year, I would be on my own and needing to secure a place of residence. On a spiritual level, it could have been that I was living down the street from an enormous cemetery and picking up on that energy, or that the previous tenants had left some bad energy from their actions in that house, suspected by DCF showing up twice in search for the past renters, and the copious amounts of claw marks on the first floor bathroom door from their dog scratching to break free. It was bad juju. Because of these dreams, understandably enough, I started to have extreme anxiety. I first noticed the start of this anxiety at the beginning where I was still at the, this is an unusual amount of vivid nightmares back to back kind of phase. As a little goth kid that I was and still am at heart, my favorite ride at Disney World, where I was employed at the time, was the Haunted Mansion. I had gotten onto the ride, and as my dune buggy reached the graveyard portion of the ride, I started to have a panic attack. The realization of mortality and existential dread hit me right then and there. I couldn't breathe in enough air, and I felt every fiber of my body screaming to make a run for the exit, even though I couldn't as I was confined to the ride vehicle. As I breached the sunlight walking out of the exit dock, I was confused, terrified, and embarrassed all simultaneously. I thought to myself, what just happened? This is my favorite ride. Why am I scared? This is a goofy kids ride about caricature ghosts and cheesy morbid puns. Why did the concept of death get to me so badly? From there, my anxiety grew. I obviously couldn't ride that ride anymore, but now I wasn't able to enjoy roller coasters without my brain whispering the possibility of the most horrifying outcomes of a freak accident that of course was bound to happen when I strapped in for the ride. Eventually, I couldn't enjoy rides that had subtle nods to mortality, like Splash Mountain or Pirates of the Caribbean. Then the anxiety left the theme parks and started making a place in my everyday life. I would helplessly let the intrusive thoughts take over, dwelling on fatal what-ifs that left me living in a constant state of fear, such as, what if a meteor hit the Earth right now? Or what if a car drove into the wall that I'm sitting next to? Unfortunately, due to growing up in the American public school system and being part of the LGBTQIA+, one of my what-if fears that I had before then grew louder during this period of heightened anxiety. What if a shooter comes in here right now? How would I respond? What could I do to survive? I still lived my life as normally as I could, but on the inside, this was eating away at me. I was persistently tired and stressed, and I couldn't enjoy the things that made life worthwhile to me. Some of you might recall during Joys and Concerns one day that I came up and defeatedly stated, I'm just not okay. That was during this time. My fear of death had completely taken over my life, and I felt completely helpless. My hope was at the bottom of the barrel, and I felt as if I would never escape these nightmares and thoughts, that I wouldn't be able to find happiness again. Then, in the middle of my year of death, February 2018, a dear friend of mine from high school was tragically killed in a car accident in Fern Park. Ben King was a friend and fellow choir member. His sister Angela was a good friend, and I felt welcomed and cared for by their family. When I attended his funeral, I experienced my first Catholic funeral mass. Afterwards, we gathered into the reception area, and it felt so strange and surreal that I was gathering with my friends who were all in their early 20s, sharing good times and reminiscing about Ben. The concept of mortality hit me even harder that day. As we left the reception area, I saw his girlfriend, who I didn't personally know. But when I saw her face, I immediately recognized the agony she was feeling. I had been feeling the same way since my year of death started. She looked absent, as if it was just her body that was there and nothing else. Understandably so, as she witnessed the accident happen right in front of her, as she followed behind him on their way back from the gym. I can only imagine the reaction she had as it happened before her very eyes. My heart still aches incredibly for her. I felt guilty that I felt the same way, since I had not lost someone to the degree that she did. What I saw was fiction projected in my brain almost every night. What she witnessed was real. I wanted to speak to her that day, but I felt it was better to give her space, as so many had already talked to her before, and I know she didn't want to be there. She didn't want this to be happening at all. During this funeral, I also experienced my first funeral procession, where we drove from the church to the cemetery. It was there when I felt something. I felt as if something was calling to me as I was seeing my friend being buried into the ground. It was a feeling that I had before at my grandmother's funeral and when I was told about my great Aunt Jean's passing. Today, I'm not sure what it was, but at the time, it felt like a divine presence was here to comfort me by calling me to follow its path, and at that time, I thought it was the path of Christianity. After all, each time this feeling reared its head, it was always in a Christian setting, such as a church or Christian-based funeral. This was my lowest point in my year of death, and I was desperate for the tiniest bit of hope to cling to. I had seen how others used their faith as a coping mechanism for their everyday hardships that they faced, but also as a definitive answer as to what happens after death. I saw how they were able to live their life confidently and unafraid as they believed that their deity would not forsake them, and I needed that security. I threw myself into Bible studies, Christian Facebook pages, and started to act how a devoted Christian would act. I had hoped that if I tried hard enough and focused on holy and wholesome things, these macabre dreams would eventually cease and my life would start to get better. Unfortunately, that which has worked for many others did not in fact work for me. Once again, I started to feel the hopelessness as I continued to suffer these nightmares despite all my efforts. Finally, in September of 2018, as I moved into my first house with my roommates, the nightmares stopped. I was still experiencing depression and anxiety, but at least I wasn't dreading bedtime anymore. I still slept with a light and TV on with the early months of my new residency, and then it just became the low luminance of the television. Things started to get better. I'd have an occasional nightmare here and there, but these were starting to become the more far-fetched and surreal scenarios that never emulated real life. While things started to ease up, I took it upon myself to reach out to seek a therapist. I started to get established with my therapist, who helped me feel heard as I explained to him the different events in my life and about the year of death that I had recently come out of. I felt safe and secure and started to pick up healthier coping mechanisms. Finding out that I was constantly needing control was a huge turning point for me, because I had many events in my life where I had no control of the situation I was in, or even over myself, and I couldn't handle not having that kind of security. That being brought to my attention started my journey in healing, as I realized that there are things that I would never be able to control, and that's okay. To this day, I still have some control issues that I need to work on, but I at least know now how to recognize it, take a step back, especially when it comes to the universe and mortality. Another way I physically was able to cope was through teaching. Being around new life gave me a barrier from the depressing, intrusive thoughts about death for at least 8 hours of my day. It was a very pleasant and adorable distraction. Then one night in Millennial Group, someone said to me that now sounds so stupidly obvious, yet it changed my perspective significantly. As we were talking, the subject of death came up, and a former member of UUUF said something along the lines of, "I view death like that period when you sleep, where you don't have any dreams, to where you just immediately wake up as hours hadn't just passed, except you just don't wake up this time. You won't know that you have passed away." Them explaining that made me feel so comforted in a strange way, that even with my fear of the unknown, when the time comes, I won't have the burden of finding out. I see now that that kind of explanation was exactly what my mother had been telling me she believed for years, but to hear it described like that just helped my brain process it in a way that it could better comprehend at the time. The thought of the explanation of nothing was unconceivable for my brain, as I had only known existence and couldn't fathom imagining that stopping. As I started to finally come to terms and make peace with death, 2020 rolled around, and with it, COVID-19. Over 6.5 million people had passed away within the past 2 years to this pandemic, and everyone else's way of life changed drastically. Rightfully so, people's fears of dying grew more and more each day as the death toll rose drastically. So, with this mass expiry happening globally, you'd think that my progress towards getting over my fear of death would regress, right? Surprisingly, that didn't happen. Though I was empathetic while seeing all the pain and sorrow that the world was suffering, my fears and anxieties never returned. I felt as if maybe the year of death I experienced and my journey recovering from it was the universe's twisted way of preparing me for this morbid, nerve-wracking, life-changing event as my recovery came to a fruition right beforehand. I took in stride this new reality and did what I needed to do to survive, just as many others did. But I don't feel as if I was affected as badly, mentally and emotionally, as others. Toward the end of the year, a new fear started to grow. In December of 2020, I lost my Papa to COVID-19. His funeral was curated by the same mortuary, but the service was a lot smaller, socially distanced, and masked. I was obviously sad that my last remaining grandfather had passed away, but I noticed that during his funeral, I couldn't bring myself to cry. I always coped with any big emotions I had through my tears, whether it be sadness, anger, happiness, etc., but this time I didn't. Again, I felt guilty that I had this lack of reaction, and I started to fear that I was becoming desensitized to death. I love my Papa and happily recall the memories we had together, but his death did not affect me in the way all the others had. After his funeral, the world continued into the pandemic, where media magnified the news of panic and death, and I continued to feel indifferent to all of it and continue focusing on myself as I did what I personally needed to do to get through this. Luckily, as the pandemic started to slow down, I was finally able to breathe and let down my emotional walls. With the help of my new therapist, I was able to understand that what I saw as me being desensitized was a coping mechanism to keep myself safe from any emotional harm that was sure to come due to the environment that the world was in. She also helped me work on deeper healing and becoming closer with balancing and embracing all my emotions, especially with death, so that I could helpfully navigate them in the future. Even with the work I have been achieving, I am still at some odds with death, as one day I am able to fully accept it as the fact of life that it is, and on another day I feel twinges of dread when going into deeper thought about it. But through this journey, I do know now that it will never be able to take over my life again, because I realize that I can't fully experience and enjoy the gift of life that I have been given if I am dwelling on its inevitable end. I need to appreciate every moment I can and make sure that when the time comes, I can say that I lived, and I lived to the best of my ability, as good as I possibly could have. I must be okay with the things I can't control and make the best out of the things I can, and let whatever may come, come. So going back to that writing prompt from my senior year, I don't know what will happen after I die. And my speech is not necessarily about what comes next, as spiritually, I've kept an agnostic viewpoint while speaking. I still have my personal beliefs and reservations, but I at least know that when the time comes, it won't matter to me. I have made peace with death due to finding a greater peace and appreciation with life. Thank you all for listening to my story. May you have a killer life and a lively death.
Thank you, Chloe. We're going to extinguish our chalice now, so please recite with me while I extinguish the flame. And now we will have our closing music, Abide With Me. Is this something that you're singing, Chloe? No. Oh, you're doing that. Okay.
Please rise. So this is hymn number 101. And the text of this hymn was written by Henry Francis Light, who's an Anglican minister, and he wrote it as he was toward the end of his struggle with tuberculosis, which he lost, I think, about 6 weeks after he wrote this text. It was essentially, this text, or the hymn, is essentially a prayer that God remains by the singer's side throughout life, and particularly in the face of death. Abide with me, thus for thee and thine. The darkness deepens, still with me abide. abide with me.
My closing words today are from the Reverend Susan Brown, and we are having Halloween, but we're also celebrating All Saints' Day this week. So this is in relationship to that. Welcome all you saints. Yes, you are saints. All of you are saints. For it is not by perfection that we are sainted, rather it is by our actions. It is not by perfection that we are sainted, rather it is by our presence. We are not by perfection that we are sainted, rather it is by our giving. It is not by perfection that we are sainted, rather it is by our living. It is not by perfection that we are sainted, rather it is by our gathering. Together in love, with love, to become a nurturing, welcoming, healing, and faithful worshiping community. Welcome all you saints. And I think we'll have music, and then we'll get ready for our trunk or treat.
I just want to say something real quick. I chose this song because Ode to Billy Joe has been a song that I listen to every time going up to Tennessee to visit my father's family. And it touches on the subject of death. And I just felt, with how nonchalantly it's talked about in the song, it felt very close to home when going to Tennessee. It was the 3rd of June, another sleepy, dusty Delta day. I was out chopping cotton and my brother was baling hay. And at dinner time we stopped and walked back to the house to eat. And Mama hollered at the back door, y'all remember to wipe your feet. And then she said, I got some news this morning from Choctaw Ridge. Today, Billy Joe McAllister jumped off the Tallahatchie Bridge. And Papa said to Mama as he passed around the black-eyed peas, Billy Joe never had a lick of sense. Pass for biscuits, please. There's 5 more acres in the lower 40 I've got to plow. And Mama said it was a shame about Billy Joe anyhow. Seems like nothing ever comes to no good up on Choctaw Ridge. And now Billy Joe McAllister jumped off the Tallahatchie Bridge. And Brother said he recollected when he and Tom and Billy Joe put a frog down my back at the Carroll County Picture Show. And wasn't I talking to him after church last Sunday night? I'll have another piece of apple pie. No, it don't seem right. I saw him at the sawmill yesterday up on Choctaw Ridge. And now you tell me Billy Joe jumped off the Tallahatchie Bridge. And Mama said to me, child,